On the night of July 10, 2001, the Northridge Police Department, New South Wales, Australia, received a frantic emergency call. The caller panicked. Screaming at the top of his voice into his phone, he yelled, "Someone shot my parents! I think they're all bleeding! They're on the floor!" The police dispatcher asked for his location, but couldn't elicit more than that his parents were dead and he didn't know what to do. He finally told them where he was. North Ryde.
Someone has shot my parents. I think they're all bleeding. They're on the floor.
What suburb are you in?
They're not bleeding. What do I do?
What suburb are you in?
North Ryde.
North Ryde. And your parents are
They're not moving.
they're both being shot, have they?
I don't know. There's a lot of blood everywhere. It's my mom.
Just hold on. Yeah, we will. We're sending the ambulance now.
Police and ambulance personnel sped to the scene of the brutal crime, a house on Cunningham Road in North Ryde. On arriving, they were greeted by a ghastly display. 3 members of the Gonzalez family, Teddy, Mary, and their daughter Claudine. They lay dead. It looked like a savage home invasion, whereby the family had been brutally murdered. In the midst of the tragedy, it was found that the youngest son, 20-year-old Seth Gonzalez, was alive and sitting on the bench in the garage. Distraught, he seemed to be in shock. Officers were visibly affected by the devastating scene they had just entered. In the following hours, the same Seth portrayed himself as the bereaved son, mourning over the death of his family. Yet suspicion would start arising within minutes after the murders. Only days after the funeral, Seth shocked friends and family members when they met him speaking out against his inheritance. The activities during the memorial were remarkable enough. When the mourners were solemnly listening to the haunting ballad "One Sweet Day" by Mariah Carey and Boys II. Men, which has themes of loss and reunion in the afterlife, Seth's actions began to clash so sharply with the display of grief on his face. His external appearance of sorrow seemed like a play when, days after the funerals, he invested his compensation money from the government into a flashy new sports car. That unusual behavior attracted the attention of the police, and now the case has taken a sharp turn. The detectives probed deeply into the case, and the web of lies and deceit began to unravel. Seth had then fabricated a story in which he said his house had been burgled and that an intruder killed his family. As the police dug deeper into his background and questioned those close to him, the evidence began to paint a much darker picture. Probers, however, discovered that Seth was living a secret life. He had flaws with debts, failed business, and relentless pressure from his family for better things in the future. Indeed, the Gonzalez family was one of the hard-working families from the Philippines who has worked so hard for success in Australia. Teddy, the father, was one of the famous lawyers there, and the whole family is living comfortably in their home in North Ryde. But Seth could never match up to those expectations and brought him increasing resentment and a desire for the control of family wealth. What finally sealed Seth's fate were a number of damning pieces of evidence, including purchasing a bottle of bleach the day before the murders, in which was found at the crime scene, and his internet searches for how to commit the perfect murder. Further evidence which came from other witness reports of out-of-character behavior and his alibi began crumbling under scrutiny. One of the most dreadful revelations was when it was established that, just before the murder, Seth had sent a forged email from his sister Claudine, claiming the family received death threats. It was a deliberate attempt to cover up a story about the massacre he would commit. In 2004, Seth Gonzalez was found to have committed the murder of his father, mother, and sister after months of investigation and trial. No holds were barred, but even for him, what he did was far from the easy way out. His motives, money greed and a desperate urge to flee from the pressures of the family expectations, just could not be so easily shaken off. He harbored a belief that by killing them, he would be in the clear to live off of his family's money and lead a new life. But the brutality and attempts to cover up the crime made his guilt deeper. Even when he was condemned, Seth did not give up on hope and continued with claims that he was innocent. He made several appeals on his sentence, trying to quash the judgment on his conviction. All the appeals were dismissed, the last on April 3, 2023. It was on this day that the hope for freedom remained and was stamped into the ground when his ultimate future would be to spend his life in a jail cell. The Gonzalez family murders will forever stand as one of the most horrific crimes committed in Australia, and in many ways, a true fairy tale tale of blood-related betrayal, greed, and execution-style murder. Seth, who remains a convicted killer to date, continues behind bars, still living in a world of his own innocence, while the memories of his family's brutal end haunt the lives of those who knew them. So what actually happened? To make sense of this tragic story, we must go as far back as 2001. The Gonzalez family lived in North Ryde, the suburb of New South Wales, near Macquarie University, which is usually referred to as Australia's Silicon Valley. High-tech companies like Microsoft, HP, Oracle, and 3M dominated the area and possessed excellent public transport networks, which made it a perfect place for middle-class people to settle. The two-story villa, beautiful in its design, stood as a testament of how hard the Gonzalez family worked and had truly accomplished. Teddy bought the house on Collins Street in 1999 for $20,000 Australian dollars. It was not ready, however, till 2 years later. The family finally moved into the house in December 2000. Teddy Gonzalez's life is a classic example of resilience, determination, and the will to survive. Born in 1954 at Baguio City, Philippines, his life was very far from being rosy. His family was poor. As the fourth among the children, he suffered all the adversities of poverty, from which he emerged, instead of weakening him further as he went along, to challenge him into changing his situation. He studied in the law school of Baguio University and gave his best effort in a desperate bid to alleviate his life. It was during his university days that Teddy met Mary Loiva Claridad. She was 3 years younger than him. He fell in love with her the same way that she did with him. Like him, Mary came from a family of hardworking people. When he finally decided to settle down, Teddy married Mary after she graduated from university in 1977. Despite his being very driven in his career, Teddy was a totally devoted husband, surprising his wife with flowers and candle-lit dinners. The firstborn child was a boy, and his name was Seth, given on September 16, 1980. This boy's name, Seth, was chosen by Teddy based on its very meaningful significance, which he was to make known when Seth would be 21 years of age. Born to them as the daughter in 1983 July was Claudine on July 9th. As time passed by with the flow of years, Teddy's career took off from law to real estate and many other businesses. He has established audio stores and even put investments in some hotels to ensure stability and success for his family. Life, however, was not destined that way. A calamitous earthquake struck Baguio City on 1990, and overnight, it shattered Teddy's career and home. This tragedy unfolded even further when Seth was trapped inside a stairwell during the calamity, and Teddy crawled into the rubble to rescue him, risking his life as well. Though Seth survived, Teddy suffered a chronic ligament injury. Despite all these hardships, the family considered it a good fortune, and instead of being defeated by this mishap, they wanted to rebuild their lives once again, this time by migrating to Australia. In Australia, Teddy passed the required examinations to become a lawyer, and by 1993, he had started an immigration law office. Mary ran the business inside, while Teddy gained clients. In a short time, however, the sweat and hard work of both of them entwined them into Australia's middle class. The Gonzalez family were very intense Catholics, attending Mass every Sunday and teaching several things about living a true faith in their home. They stressed education and success, especially for their children, hoping Seth and Claudine would achieve even more than they had achieved in life. But this intense focus on success also sowed the seeds of what would become a terrible tragedy. It was on this very morning of July 10, 2001, that Teddy and Mary both went out to work separately, while Seth was occupied with a full day's schedule. In the morning, he had gone to school. He had spent the afternoons at his father's law office. He had planned to meet his friends in the evening. Claudine happened to have summer break, so she did not leave home. She read a lot and was chatting with friends. It was the day after she had turned 18 years old, and she was still in a celebratory mood, text messaging friends to finalize plans. Still, at some point during the day, Claudine suddenly lost contact with her friends. It was 11:45 by the time Seth returned home. The unimaginable horror was waiting for him. In 3 minutes, he made the call to the police. On that night, the police arrived at the scene. Not a random home invasion, but a family brutally murdered. And it turned out to be a case which unfolded into something much darker than anyone could ever have imagined. As information continued to spill out, a series of strange facts emerged that contradicted the strongly logical initial assumption that it was a hate crime against Asians. A very revealing area was the fact that nearly $1,000 AUD cash was still untouched in both Teddy and Mary Gonzalez pockets, which ruled out robbery as the underlying reason. Despite the look of a burgled house, with closets and drawers open in every room, the house felt eerily ordered. Clothes were neatly arranged, almost like they could have been displayed in a store, not casually flung around as one might expect in a burglary. The crime scene itself was marked by horrific violence. Mary had taken a savage neck wound. Claudine had suffered 7 stab wounds and blunt trauma, where a depression marked the wall of her bedroom. 2 knives were taken from the kitchen that later proved to be the crime weapons. However, this was bloodily done, except for their 6 family dogs remaining sound and locked behind the laundry room door, a chilling sign that the perpetrator knew or took pains to spare them from the extensive violence. Perhaps the kitchen was the most mystifying scene. There was one window apparently broken out, perhaps giving an idea that someone must have entered the house under duress. However, the countertops were suspiciously clean with no fingerprints or any other physical evidence to indicate that anyone had entered the house. This could suggest that the crime scene was set to give the appearance of a break in the more complicated thing about this case. Another thing that puzzled detectives was the timeline of the murders. Estimation of the time of death for each victim showed that it took several hours. Body temperature readings revealed that Claudine and Mary must have died before Teddy, since their temperatures had cooled more than his. This made them revalidate some of their initial thoughts. The bloodstains on Teddy's briefcase and Mary's handbag seemed to have been placed there after the killings, almost as if they were murdered in the act of carrying them, hence suggesting that the killer wanted to mislead investigators. In drawing a more fitting timeline, detectives examined communications sent by the victims. Her last text message was at 4:10 p.m. An open book on her desk suggested she had been studying when attacked, so her estimated time of death falls between 4:10 and 4:30 p.m. Mary likely died shortly after returning home in the neighborhood around 5:30 p.m., still in her shoes, a common practice as she doffed them upon entering the house. His father, who had gone out to work late in the evening, was found still in his work clothes with his briefcase lying beside him. This gives an estimate that he must have died between 7 and 8 p.m., which would make him the last one to die. These explanations motivated detectives to change their theories. The perfection of the crime scene setup, the fact that a family was targeted specifically, and the animals were spared seemed to reflect more on another, deeper motive for the murder. All this pointed to a killer who knew the family and probably knew their movements within the home. With each new piece of evidence that surfaced, the investigation focus shifted from an outside assailant to someone who had access to the house and was familiar with the victim's schedules. The broken window, clean countertops, and staged appearance of a robbery presented flags to the fact that the true motive lay much closer to home than was first considered. It seemed then that in a chillingly calculated manner, more and more pieces of the puzzle were falling into place as detectives dug deeper into the final days and hours of the Gonzalez family. The sequence of the incidents, the calculated use of time for these killings to be spontaneous, and the methodical manipulation of evidence all spoke of a perpetrator very intimate with the family. Individuals who took immense care in not leaving any evidentiary trace but a mistake on their part would soon expose the truth. If the attack had been racist, the killer would not have waited for each member of the family to come home, and certainly would not have come unarmed. He or she would have entered and immediately taken knives from the house so that more murders could be committed. The killer showered during his visit to the house as well, because police found water on the bathroom floor. The next night, police questioned Seth in a lot more detail about what had happened the previous night. This time, they pointed out inconsistencies in his story. Seth said he arrived around 6 p.m. at the house, but he returned to his car because friends had texted that dinner would be an hour late. It was raining outside, so he didn't get out, but called the house from inside the car, but no one answered. He drove to Blacktown, a town 28 kilometers away, where another friend waited for him. According to him, he spent 2 hours looking for the new address of his friend, met them at around 8 p.m., and came back home at 11:45 p.m. when he dialed the police. He maintains that he tried to administer first aid on Claudine since she still had blood dripping from her throat. The forensic report, however, disagrees with this assertion, as Claudine had apparently been dead for some time and no evidence of CPR existed. Seth, too, said he saw 2 individuals, but based on a diagram from the scene, police believed that the noise of Seth's car going into the house and then his stepping inside would have given an intruder sufficient time to escape. Police began to suspect Seth also. They searched his room as well and found a piece of clothing with blue paint on it, and this indeed matched some writing at the scene of the crime. They also took his computer and a shoebox. They compared an identical pair of shoes they found at the scene with those in the footprints, and it matched up. His internet search history from February to July 2001 was full of searches for plant poisons, which led them to discover that he had purchased toxic plant seeds on June 24th. A week before the murders, Seth's mother, Mary, had been hospitalized due to severe stomach pains. She was then diagnosed with colitis, but now suspected she had been poisoned. The third interrogation in August 2001 told the police that Seth had bought the toxic seeds himself due to heartbreak and disappointment in life. But the contradictions were not sufficient to file charges for the simple reason that there was no tangible evidence against Seth. In this regard, the police let Seth go, but kept tapping his telephone and trying to find a plan to catch him by hook or by crook. Suspicion against Seth not only increased among the police, but also among his friends and family. On the day of his press conference, he met the family accountant to find a solution concerning inheritance. On the funeral day of Mother, he sang a song called One Sweet Day, and because of his performance, over 300 people present became in a coma. He later moved into a luxury apartment and even spent government compensation money to renovate his mother's car. 2 months later, after all the carnage, he concocted a plan in which he would claim to have brain cancer and would need $190,000 AUD to operate on it. He even prepared false medical documents for his relatives to sign. Those documents had also reached the police office. On low currency, Seth began selling his jewelry, among other things. He ordered a Lexus within 1 week worth $173,000 AUD, which once more brought back suspicion. His Aunt Emily told the court she saw his car in the garage about 6 p.m. of the day the murders occurred in the house. She did not, however, go in there as it was silently eerie. 2 months into the probe, the sting operation finally began to yield fruits for the police. Seth Gonzalez, unwary in his gullibility, became friendly with an undercover officer and began talking quite freely. Manipulated with care, he eventually got Seth to change the alibi that had been given to him at the start. Now he claimed that on the day of the murders, he had gone to a brothel but hid it from everyone, including his girlfriend, because of embarrassment. All these were cause for grave concern among investigators since this change in story had occurred suddenly, and the phone records obtained through tapped calls revealed that Seth made repeated calls with seemingly suspicious questions to the brothel. Further investigation by the detectives discovered that the woman whom Seth claimed he had visited that day had been on vacation at the time as well, which disintegrated his new alibi entire. Another attempt at concealing the truth was hiding in the shadow of bribery. The taxi driver admitted it. He had been paid to falsely testify that he saw Seth driving at a time when police believed that murders were committed. Law enforcement remained suspicious of Seth, though they still lacked sufficient concrete evidence to formally charge him. The search became more heated as detectives continued collecting more evidence calmly and confidently that Seth's knots, entangled in his web of lies, would soon be consumed by the eaten away by eating away them. Every turn of the thread of his tale only managed to strengthen their conviction that he was the key to unlocking the puzzle, and it was only a matter of time before the intricately woven mask would completely collapse. Seth, of course, without realizing his folly, was literally handing over all the evidence the police needed. He discovered that the undercover officer had claimed he had seen his car at 4:30 p.m. Now, sure, he was convinced that there was an informant of the undercover officer in the police department, so he requested him to keep listening for more information and sent him a sketch of his own drawing the whole crime scene. The information about each victim involved time of death, which was of high significance because the police had never made such information public. The handwriting on the drawing appeared to be from the same person who wrote the notes left behind at the crime scene. On June 2, 2002, in the evening, there was a pretended attack reported. The police arrived on the scene when someone called around 8:30 p.m. to report that a rape occurred. Immediately after his arrival, he was found lying in a ditch with minor facial injuries. Seth told someone who detained him that somebody covered his head with a plastic bag and assaulted him. He could not describe the attacker. A doctor later established that Seth had no head injuries. This incident gave the police a new lead. Seth had mentioned the executive of the will, his grandmother, which raised concerns about possible schemes related to inheritance. Seth's parents, Teddy and Mary, had made a joint will in February 1998. The joint will provided that if one of the spouses died, the survivor inherited all. If both were killed, then his share would be divided down the middle along with his sister Claudine. There was no willful choice of an executor from the family, but it was the grandmother alone who was to carry out the will. This is the reason for which the police feared Seth might try to kill his grandmother so that she met a natural death. They could wait no longer. They issued an arrest warrant for Seth on 13th of June 2002 for murder charges. More information about Seth's disastrous background began surfacing after his arrest. Hardworking was the only way to describe Teddy and Mary in a fight to amass some 1.5 million AUD. They were disciplinarians who rewarded good performance. Seth was made a cardiac surgeon, and his sister had to be a teacher. He failed academically, loved singing, and did not make it to the medical or law courses. In 1999, Teddy tried to get Seth into the University of New South Wales's medical program. Seth was coerced to read more and work at his father's family law office. He later dropped out of school to become a musician, and in doing so raised eyebrows with his father. By mid-2000, Teddy enrolled Seth in the law program at Macquarie University and bought him a car, to which Seth gave his heart. He excelled academically, but was later disciplined when he assisted his sister in changing some of her grades. Seth was a bedwetter until he grew up. The family often laughed and made fun of him, while his parents were very strict toward his sister too. She had been sent out for dating when she was practically still in school. Seth was also sent away for the same offense when his girlfriend wanted to break up with him. Such treatment did not make Seth love his family or himself either. Seth started planning to poison his family on June 24, 2002. He ordered toxic plant seeds, but only found out that the supplier was on holiday. The plotter of his family's demise fabricated a fake reason explaining that he needed the seeds for his mother's 60th birthday and fast-tracked the order. Upon receiving the seeds, Seth soaked them in hot water and blended the infusion into his mother's food. On July 1st, his mother acted strange, and on July 3rd was hospitalized. She was discharged to home on 4th of July, at which Seth tried to pose that she had been poisoned with food and mailed forged letters to the food manufacturer stating that they made poisonous food. After Seth's mother, Mary, miraculously recovered from the poisoning attempt on July 1, 2002, Seth was deeply disappointed that his initial plan did not succeed. His anger and frustration grew as he clung to the belief that his girlfriend did not truly care for him and that his parents unfairly favored his sister, Claudine. On July 6, 2002, Seth had a heated argument with his mother over these issues, which only intensified his feelings of isolation and resentment. His frustration was compounded by his inability to escape the family dynamics that he felt were stifling him. On July 9, 2002, following a birthday party that his sister had organized for him, Seth made the fateful decision to execute his plan. He had carefully prepared for this moment by acquiring a baseball bat and several knives. Seth returned home with these weapons and waited for his mother to arrive. Once she was home, he launched a brutal attack on her. Afterward, he waited for his father, Teddy, to come back and attacked him as well. To cover his tracks and create a misleading narrative, Seth staged the scene to appear as though it was a racially motivated attack. He scattered items around the house and spray-painted racist slurs on the walls. However, forensic analysis revealed paint particles on Seth's coat, which became a crucial piece of evidence. Following the attacks, Seth disposed of the weapons and went out for dinner with a colleague, hoping that his alibi would be supported by the possibility of someone witnessing the crime scene while he was away. Upon returning home, Seth found the house eerily quiet, which prompted him to call the police himself. His attempt to fabricate an alibi was undermined by the evidence, including a client who had seen Seth's car at the crime scene around 4:30 p.m., contradicting his claimed whereabouts. At trial, it was revealed that Seth Gonzalez had fabricated large portions of his life, weaving a web of lies to portray himself as someone far more accomplished than he truly was. He boasted about being a world boxing champion, an up-and-coming music star, and the owner of a highly successful modeling agency. Not a one of these grandiose claims holds any truth. His fabricated story was part of a bigger lie he built through layers of make-believe, and which broke apart in court as a testament to the portrait of deception that he so carefully built. On May 20, 2004, 3 life terms were handed to Seth Gonzalez consecutively as he pleaded guilty for butchering his family brutally, as well as attempted poisoning. It was a rare poisonous plant seeds found in his garden that forms the key piece of evidence for the poisoning count. This was found by the court to be incriminatory due to the fact that it directly connects him to the attempt. Meanwhile, the family home had become notoriously hard to sell, as the gruesome events which took place within its walls stained the house. In August 2004, a Taiwanese Buddhist couple placed a deposit on the property with an intention of buying it. When they found out about the tragic past of the house, they demanded their money back. The real estate agency initially refused, which led to a dispute. Ultimately, it was fined and compelled to change its policies for disclosure of property to subsequent buyers. As news of its dark past went out into the public, the house's market value continued plummeting. The house wouldn't sell until the reclusive buyer came on October 7, 2005, to buy it for 720,000 AUD. Despite all the omen attached to the mansion of death and darkness, the prospective buyer decided to occupy it to transform it into a haven of peace from a dark and violent past. Seth's third appeal was denied on March 26, 2005. He is currently serving life sentences at Lithgow Correctional Centre in New South Wales. The meaning behind the name Seth, which his father had promised to reveal to him on his 21st birthday, remains a mystery, as Seth will never have the opportunity to learn it. The tragic case of Seth Gonzalez is a harrowing example of how deep-seated resentment and personal failures can culminate in horrific acts of violence. Seth's calculated attempts to poison his mother and stage a murder scene to appear as a racially motivated attack were driven by his intense feelings of inadequacy and perceived familial favoritism. His escalating isolation and desperate measures reveal a psyche plagued by frustration and a profound sense of injustice. Despite his elaborate efforts to mislead the investigation, including his attempts to fabricate an alibi and the exaggerated claims of his accomplishments, Seth's actions eventually unraveled under scrutiny. Forensic evidence, such as the paint particles on his coat and the rare poisonous plant seeds from his garden played crucial roles in exposing the truth. The aftermath of Seth's crimes was felt beyond the courtroom. The family home, marred by its association with the murders, faced significant challenges in finding new owners. The real estate agency's initial refusal to refund the deposit and subsequent penalties highlighted the importance of transparency and full disclosure in property transactions. Ultimately, Seth's appeal was denied, sealing his fate as a high-risk inmate at Lithgow Correctional Center. His life sentences reflect the gravity of his actions and the meaning behind his name. A piece of his personal history left unresolved remains a poignant reminder of the unresolved mysteries in his life. This case serves as a somber reminder of how personal grievances and emotional turmoil, if left unchecked, can lead to devastating consequences for both the individuals involved and those around them.